Hello, my name's Chandler Fleming, and welcome to Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance.
And I'm Victoria Fleming, and we are the owners and therapists at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling, and are excited to do our show today on parenting today for tomorrow. And
Yes.
I think the emphasis is definitely on the tomorrow. What do we mean by that?
Well, I think we have to, have a plan in place. One of our first slides really talk about failing to plan is planning to fail. And I always think about the example of having a builder come over, say, I want to build a new house, and okay, yeah, we can do it.
What are you thinking? Two bedrooms or four?
4 bedrooms,
I don't know.
we'll put this thing together. And then we'll kind of see the plans. Well, we'll just kind of play it as we go along. There's a lot of variables here, so forth. I'd probably fire the planner. And I do know a lot of people who have built houses probably spend more time on their plans for their house than really thinking about their plan for parenting.
That is a very good point. And I want to emphasize the fact that you said that failing to plan is planning to fail, because you would never build a house without an appropriate blueprint, without definite goals in mind and knowing where you're going, what the outcome is. And the same is very true, if not more so important for sure, with our parenting. And so as we look at this, failing to plan is planning to fail, there are some considerations you want to have in mind. And the very first one is know your goals. Your goal is ultimately to raise responsible adults. Know your why. Consider the cost. There is a cost to good parenting, and consider the kid.
Yes.
And what is our emphasis on consider the kid?
Well, the kid may have different strengths and abilities, and it's really important to consider what they want. There are some things that may be non-negotiable, but if you want your son to be a football player and he doesn't want to play football, your goals may not be their goals. So you want to consider the kid and what their strengths are, what they want, their desire.
And that personality facet. I mean, we only have the 2, but there are people who have 5 and 6 kids, and they will tell you that each child has a different motivation, a different personality. And so what works for one child really well may not work as well for another, which makes parenting all the more of a challenge, but also all the more rewarding as you keep looking and assessing and seeing what you need to do to reach those goals for each individual child. So let's take a look at some of the steps we need to include. And what are those? What are some things we need to consider?
Well, we got to consider the child, but also when we consider that goal, what is it that we're looking for? And a lot of times with parents, when I ask them what their goals of parenting are, they tend to be pretty fuzzy. I just want a happy kid. Well, what are the factors that include having a happy kid? What are the factors of, happy kid, unhappy adult? I think a lot of kids would be happy if they spent most of their time in the Caribbean, playing volleyball and surfing, but
or getting to game all the time and never having to do homework. And to be honest, gaming all the time is super convenient for the parent, but not the goal that you want.
Right.
That's failing to plan.
That's failing to plan. So it's looking at that, and then really taking a look at why do we avoid this? And lots and lots of parents, we really do avoid what is our parenting plan.
Yes,
like I said, a lot of people put much, much more time into planning building a house than they do trying to plan
or planning a vacation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of effort that goes into it. And so we need to look at that list of why do we tend to avoid? What is it about us that will tend to avoid proactive parenting? And let's be honest, it's inconvenient. It can be just too hard. Sometimes we think it'll just take care of itself. Other times, to be honest, we're overwhelmed and we don't even know where to begin. Sometimes you're just tired, particularly for parents that both are working full-time jobs and have a commute and their kids involved in a lot of things.
I think it's really important to take a look at it'll take care of itself. I think that's the attitude of a lot of parents, where sure, my kid will understand or my kid will work this out themselves. I don't need to make that decision for them. They don't need my input. It'll just all work out. And sometimes it does, but for the vast majority of the time, there's a price to pay for not having a plan.
And I know in that slide we had at the bottom, pay me now or pay me later.
Yeah, and it was from an old commercial. I think it was like a muffler commercial. You can pay me now or you can pay me later. Sometimes, a little bit of investment now takes away a huge payment later. So what are you pouring into your kids, and what's the cost of trying to play catch up later?
Oh, that's a very good point. And that I think you and I had talked about a woman who had failed to plan ahead.
Oh, yeah.
She didn't want to pay now, so she didn't have the oil changed in her car for what, over 30,000 miles, and her engine blew up. And then she kind of wondered, and yet, oh, the cost in the long run. Pay me now, maybe a lot smaller. It's a lot less time. Pay me later. It could be a huge mess. It could be a blown engine that you're taking a look at. So let's take a look at some of the steps that we want to involve in that parenting for tomorrow. Parenting today for tomorrow. What are we looking at, Chandler?
Well, I think it's important to understand and plan for the difference between treatment and management. As parents, we treat our kids. And in our definition for this is, it's those things that we allow our kids to do, and to allow the situation to teach them so that they themselves can handle it, so they can fix things and adjust to the situation. So it's really up to them. An example of that could be a kid who has difficulty going out in public or taking care of themselves. There's definitely an age at which you may allow your child to go into the grocery store by themselves and to purchase something for the household. Management's the opposite. It's where we intervene and help take care of the environment so the kid can better manage it. Might be a bully at school, where instead of allowing your child to manage, hey, talking to the teacher, talking to the guidance counselor, it's you go in, you help them out with that situation. And so there's advantages to both. People who over-treat, where they say, hey, I'm going to let my kid take care of it, sometimes the kid can't take care of it, or it just creates too much chaos. Example is clean your room. Most kids can handle that, but let's say there's a situation where company's coming over in 30 minutes. You want to have a good balance of clean your room, treatment, you take care of it, and management, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to point out the directions of things.
So there's a careful dance, there's a balance in that. As you said, I like the example with company coming in 30 minutes. Treatment long term, I want my child to be able to clean their room on their own. Management, though, in this situation may be the more appropriate step. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to take a clothes basket, I'm going to throw everything in, throw it in a closet, manage the situation, and then later we can develop that treatment plan of, okay, how can we take care of this in the future? And so it's that careful balance of the two without an overemphasis on the wrong one at the wrong time. And so that's something we want to look at in terms of looking at the clock and the time we have with our children.
Right. And I think a part of that management is really looking at, hey, what is it that I'm managing? What am I allowing my child to do on their own? What did I allow them to do last year? And then what is it, how are they improving in that area? And to be honest, most parents, they really fail on the side of overly managing their kids.
That's what I thought. Helicopter parenting.
Helicopter parenting, they take care of the situation, and especially with kids who have issues and problems. And they may have legitimate problems. Your child may have anxiety or depression or ADHD. But
managing, actually, it's interesting because managing gives the parent more control. And so it's easy to see why a parent would manage. Is, to be honest, it's easier for me just to run into the bedroom and get the bedroom all tidied up because I know exactly how I want it to look. But that may not be what's best ultimately. I know it's not what's best ultimately for my child if I'm looking at that tomorrow emphasis of parenting. And the tomorrow emphasis is, again, my goal is to rear a capable, responsible, independent adult who's going to be able to launch, it makes me think of failure to launch, who's going to be able to launch on their own and be able to have not only a surviving life, but a successful, satisfying life. And so we want to always keep that in mind. So like you said, there's a place for management, but there's also very definitely a need for that emphasis on treatment. So help us determine when to balance that.
Well, it's an ongoing thing, and it's part of taking a look at where you are. Part of that is just developing a timeline and looking at where do you want your kids to be at what age, in knowing specifically in that planning of what am I going to allow my kids to do and not to do.
And you know, that's interesting. For some reason, I just thought about potty training.
Yeah.
You know, there's a very big plan typically for most parents in a timeline when it comes to those early developmental stages. You know, taking them off a bottle, introducing solid food, potty training, looking for signs of walking. And so we do this really nice planning, or at least development of a timeline and awareness of the clock when the kids are very small. But then sometimes it seems like the older and more capable and independent, we're not as good at developing that timeline. So let's talk together about looking at the timeline and what some of those questions are, those developmental or that development of a timeline is like.
So beginning with the tween years and going into the teen years, at what age would you allow your kid to spend the night at their friend's house? Mm-hmm. Are they allowed to date in a group or individually? Oftentimes I ask parents this question, at what age can your daughter date? Well, I don't know. And so because they don't know, they're not giving a clear message to their kid. Are they allowed to go to a concert? Can your son go to see AC/DC at 15 or Kid Rock or whoever? At what age are they allowed to get a job, and at what age do you expect them to get a job? At what age do you expect them to leave home, and what is your goal in that area? So it's really mentally starting with yourself and asking yourself, at what age would these things take place, and really know what it is that your expectations are.
And I think it's interesting because this again is where we get into knowing the individual child, because you may have a child that's eager to spend the night with a friend at a much younger age than one of your other children, and it's just the makeup of the child. The same with driver's license. There are kids who, man, they're 14 and they're already counting out exactly how to map, taking the classes and being able to have their license when they turn 16. And then you have the child who's fast approaching 16 and not ready, and it's not that 16 is the ultimate goal or the end game. It's what's best for that individual child, and knowing how to manage and treat so that they do ultimately drive and have their driver's license.
Yes. Because by 21, you pretty much want to make sure they have a driver's license. I'm thinking 18,
yeah.
18 and a half.
Because you're probably kind of hoping leaving home by about 21, 21, yeah.
22, 23.
Definitely not 31.
Definitely not 30. Well, I don't know. Different families, different rules, but at least know what your expectations are.
That's a good
point.
Why. And what your goals are.
Yeah. And then really knowing what those rules are for tomorrow, and know what you would do. What would you do if your 15-year-old snuck out of the house? What would you do if your 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kid came home driving your car and was very drunk? At what age what would your reaction be if you found out that your child was sexually active with somebody else? What would you do if they did drugs or are smoking cigarettes? So part of this planning ahead is really knowing, first of all, what you would do, and then communicating that information to your kid.
It's like we have all these expectations oftentimes regarding grades and how we think they're supposed to behave, but then we're not always aware or have that expectation that, gee, my child's going to try some things out and may try smoking a cigarette, may become interested with a member of the opposite sex and want to become active, and what am I going to do when those situations present? And so just being prepared so that you have a response in place, or that conversations have been taking place even before that behavior could become a curiosity, so that they know your house rules, you know your house rules, and a plan is in place. And I think that's super important.
And I think oftentimes it is a negotiation, and you want to start out negotiating, laying down the line. If my 15-year-old daughter at the time said, hey, I'm going up north with my boyfriend, his parents are going to be out of town, we're just going to hang out at the cottage, the answer would be no, absolutely not. It may be different if she's 22. But at least there's sort of an understanding of where it starts. Or if my son decides he wants to go to a concert, there would be a rule in place, and at least some frame of reference to start that negotiation. Oftentimes, when the child is most passionate about something. Hey, my best friend got tickets to Wiz Khalifa or whoever. I'm going Friday night. And you say, no, that's against the rules. Well, we never talked about it. And a lot of times you're thrown off like, do I allow this? Do I not allow it? So it's really important to have that plan, have a plan ahead of time, and then look for opportunities to share that information.
So it sounds like there's a conversation that's needing to take place between the parents far before there's a conversation with the children. So you and I need to be in agreement about what are the house rules? What are we going to allow our children to do regarding concert? Now, if my child is wanting to go see Michael W. Smith for a Christmas concert, maybe a very different reaction.
Sure. But at least you have your standard in place, and then you can lay out the exception.
And they already know.
Yeah.
But you and I need to know, which is the blueprint. This is what we're talking about, the building the house. You and I need to have a blueprint that's a clear blueprint that may need to have some negotiation, because when I meet with the builder, he may say, you know, Victoria, that's beautiful. That looks really nice. But you know what? We're going to need to tweak it a little bit because you haven't left enough room for your closet that you want to be a walk-in closet.
Or it's just not up to code.
Or it's just not up to code. But you and I need to have a blueprint. That blueprint needs to be clearly conveyed to our children so that they know what's being built and they're not caught off guard and frustrated.
Yeah. And then it's really looking for those opportunities. I know one time there was a television program where a kid came home drunk, and definitely at that time I kind of laid out the standard in a very non-confrontational way, which was, you do know that if you ever came home drunk in my car, you wouldn't be driving my car. And I really do think that would be my rule. I think I'd be pretty consistent, maybe not forever, but if my son or daughter came home and they were driving drunk, they wouldn't drive my car for 6 months, maybe 4 months, I don't know. But at least there's a little bit of a standard there way ahead of time. And then knowing how to define those family rules, be able to kind of spread those things out and let them know what's going on. And then create those expectations. Be sure to create expectations, and then be willing to have that honest conversation about what's going on.
And we actually have it written as hard conversations. So what might be an example of one of those hard conversations that as our children are aging and they do begin to test the waters and be a little, see if there's any give in these family rules, what might a hard conversation be? You
know, I think the hard conversations can be avoided most of the time if you start them early enough. A hard conversation is your 15-year-old daughter got invited to a party from a 19-year-old boy. That's a hard conversation. She's emotionally charged.
Because she's flattered. A 19-year-old has invited her.
And it's real at that point. And it's very emotionally charged. It's a lot easier to start those conversations when she's 12. And say, you know, these are kind of our rules for dating. You know, nobody more than 5 years, more than 3 years, more than 2 years. I need to know the person first. The first date is maybe at our house. Really, the first one-on-one date should happen after you're 16. So that makes those conversations much, much easier if you start laying that foundation early.
And I appreciate what you said about 12. You know, at 12, we're already maybe watching a television show and seeing interaction and are able to start saying, you know, gosh, what went on here and what were the risks involved maybe in this particular show, and beginning to lay the foundation of your safety is one of my #1 considerations because I love you. And because I love you, there are going to be some no's that I say that you're not going to like, but somewhere down the road that tomorrow's going to come and you're going to be very glad that today I said, no, you're not able to do that. But start the conversation before they start being introduced to those situations.
Yeah, another great example is I oftentimes have kids that I see in my practice, maybe their senior year and they go off to college and they pass half their classes and fail half their classes. And then they come home from school and dad or mom said, hey, guess what? We're not paying for your classes next semester. Well, why? Well, I only pay for classes you pass. It's a little late at that point, or even halfway through. You know, it's Thanksgiving break, Halloween break, and it looks like they're going to fail half their classes. Knowing ahead of time what those expectations are really, really help.
And making that very clear.
Making it very clear.
So, okay, so what else are we looking at with that clock element?
You know, it's really what kind of skills also that you want your kid to have. I oftentimes have kids who, gosh, driving is a challenge for them. And are they really going to be ready to drive at 18? Well, they've been accepted to, I don't know, University of Western Michigan, and they're not going to be commuting back and forth. I mean, they're going to have to drive. They're going to have a car there. They're going to be working and going to school, and a car is necessary. It's really knowing what you're going to do and how are you going to get them to meet that deadline. Because if they're going to college on August 15th and they still don't drive well enough, on July 15th, you may need to start investing in driving lessons. You may push them behind the wheel a whole lot. So that you know what that goal is ahead of time. And I oftentimes refer to it as the magic number with parents and kids alike. And typically it is August 15th after their senior year. Where do you want your kid to be at that point, and what skills do you really want them to possess? So, like I said, not being able to drive, not being able to get a job, it's really how are you going to get them to that place? And the more time you have, the easier it is to kind of work into things. That's a good
point. That's a very good point. The more time you have, because an interesting thing is, if I want my child to be able to do a successful interview to get a job, then I may want to be teaching my child how to do good eye contact at a young age, how to shake hands and affirm in an appropriate manner, how to, like you said, run into the grocery store and grab a gallon of milk for me at an appropriate age, so that they're already comfortable interacting with people and doing things independently and already have some of those social skills and confidence that they need for the job that I'm wanting, or that they need to get down the road.
Oh, for sure. So let's just review a little bit in conclusion. It's important to keep an eye on the importance of planning. That failing to plan really is planning to fail. And that's where this all starts, is really knowing, first of all, with yourself, what do you believe? And what is your plan? What are those goals? What is the needs of your child? And then moving on to remembering that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure.
That is so true. It's the car. If she'd just been changing the oil along the way, she would not have had an exploded engine.
Start early.
There's
a lot less conflict when you start early. People tend to be emotionally charged in the moment when they want it right away. If a girl knows that if your rule is she's not going to be able to date until she's 16, it's a lot easier for her to accept that at 12 or 11. Hey, you know what? We don't date one-on-one until you're 16. And then be able to just kind of assess your timeline and really know the difference of what are those issues that you are working hard to manage and what are those issues that you're trying to teach your kid, the treatment side of things, of getting them to manage it on their own.
And then look for those safe times to dialogue. And that's such an emphasis on dialogue. Very often we parents can be guilty of it's a monologue. And we've got them in a car situation, which is actually a brilliant time for a good dialogue, but we may be monologuing them about our expectations or our disappointments or what they could have done or should have done. And so instead, stop, take a breath, look for those opportunities. When you're walking the dog, when you're in the car together, when there is a television show that's hitting on a topic you've been wanting to bring up, and look for those safe times to have an open, honest dialogue. Be ready to hear some things that maybe you're not ready to hear, to be asked some questions maybe you've been hoping to avoid, but be proactive, be prepared, knowing that your end game is for the best tomorrow for your child. And we so appreciate you joining us today. If you have further questions, you're welcome to call us at 248-245-1809. And then there is also a web page where you can contact us that will be at the end of the show. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much, and keep looking us up, like us on Facebook, and tell all your friends about us, and have a wonderful day.
The views expressed in this show are for general educational purposes only and do not constitute professional advice on any subject matter, nor do they necessarily reflect the views or opinions of its guests or of Independence Television. If mental health assistance is needed, please seek professional licensed treatment.